Welcome to Threat Assessment for Potential Violence and Suicide Prevention Training. Governor Jerry Brown established a national precedent by signing AB 2246, a bill that requires the adoption of suicide prevention, intervention, and follow-up plans by local California school districts with students in grades 7 through 12. Co-authored with Trevor Project, Equality California, and Assembly Member Patrick O'Donnell, AB 2246 is the first of its kind in the nation, as it mandates that all schools in California implement suicide prevention policies. The bill requires local education agencies to develop their policies in conjunction with suicide prevention experts, school and community stakeholders, and mental health professionals by the beginning of 2017-2018 school year. Each school site is responsible to put together a crisis response team threat assessment team. In this team, there should be an administrator, a school psychologist, and when applicable, a school counselor, as well as other appropriate members. Here at Roland Unified, we've developed a website where you will be able to access all of the information that will be covered in this training. You can find this website on the RUSD website resources page. 988 is a national suicide prevention lifeline. In this training, we will cover threat assessment for potential violence and threat assessment for suicide prevention. Let's get right into it. Threat assessment for potential violence. For this section, we will cover 3 parts: intervention, prevention, and postvention. At this time, Roland Unified School District has placed PBIS as a structure to help in prevention for causing harm to others as well as causing harm to self. This is a district-wide structural program that has been put into place for this purpose. If you learn that there may be a threat for potential violence towards others, these are some guidelines to stick to. First and foremost, you must secure the campus. Do not leave the student unsupervised. You may call law enforcement immediately depending on the situation. We must warn the intended victim or victims and assemble and notify your threat assess team that there has been a threat. Once the prior steps have been taken, we begin assessing the situation. Keep in mind, while assessing the situation, you may have to also call Children's Services. This will all depend on what you find while conducting the investigation. Now we go into the forms that we will be using to conduct a thorough investigation. These are the forms that you will use to ask questions. Depending on the answers that you get from the questions, you will determine the risk. The risk level will be low, moderate, high, or insignificant. This next form is intended to help the step-by-step guide regarding what you determined the level of risk was. At this point in the investigation, you would assemble your threat assessment team once again and discuss the findings regarding your investigation to determine an action plan that you will follow. Due to the fact that no case is identical and each case is very individualized, in most cases, if you do find there is any sort of threat, you'll most likely contact law enforcement and they will advise on how to move forward. If that is the case, it is likely that the student may not return to the school. However, if the student is returning to the school, you must complete a safety plan. The next form to be completed is a courtesy within our school and our district office, just to make sure that all parties involved are aware of the situation. Now for a practice scenario. Johnny is concerned about a friend. The friend has texted Johnny these emojis. Translated means, I'm so mad, no one ever does anything about bullying, and does someone need to blow up the school for something to get done? Johnny texts back, don't be dumb, and proceeds to tell his counselor. The next day, the friend texts happy emojis and says, I was just upset last night. I shouldn't have texted things about our school. I saw my counselor and feel better. As the counselor or the designated person who is in charge of investigating this scenario, what do you do? Every time a situation arises, it's important to conduct a thorough investigation, which means that the person conducting the investigation would have to go through the forms to determine the level of threat, assemble the threat assessment team, and come up with an action plan that is appropriate. The second scenario is exactly the same as the first, except for the next day the student sends a text with a boom emoji and a firearm. Same thing needs to happen. Whoever is charged with investigating the scenario must complete the forms thoroughly, assemble the threat assessment team, and determine the appropriate action plan to move forward. Now that we've gone over the first part of the training, causing harm to others, we will move right into causing harm to self. We'll go over prevention, intervention, and postvention. For prevention, as mentioned earlier, the structure that Roland Unified has in place is PBIS. In the event that it comes to your attention that there is a student who might be causing harm to him or herself, these are the things that you have to do. Secure, assess, respond, and follow up. That's the process. Once a student is secure, be sure to assemble your threat assessment team to notify them that you will be conducting a threat assessment. All of the following forms that you're going to use to determine the level of threat are on the website that can be found on the RUSD resource page. You start with the first tool, which is questions that are located there for you to determine the level of threat. Once all the questions have been completed, that will help you determine the level of threat that you're facing at this time. And you'll use this form in particular because that will help you determine what the next steps are going to be. Now that you've completed the other forms, you'll use this next form to help you figure out what your action plan will be, making sure that you are keeping your threat assessment team informed as you go through the process. This next form is intended to be an in-house communication form from the school site to the district office. Now that you've concluded your investigation, you have an idea of where the student is and what type of supports they need. Should a student need support that is outside of school, upon them returning to school, they will need a re-entry plan. Upon returning back to school, the student and the parent should meet with an individual to complete this plan prior to them going back to classes. Johnny has another friend, Ricky, who just broke up with his girlfriend. Johnny is worried about his friend who seems really withdrawn and down. He's not responding to texts like he used to. Ricky says he's okay, but what risk factors have you identified in your assessment are cause for concern? You have met with Ricky's ex-girlfriend, and now she has shared that Ricky states that life is not worth living. She thinks that he's trying to pressure her into getting back together with him by talking about suicide again. After speaking with parent, who is on their way to meet with you and Ricky, you discover that Ricky had made an attempt 3 months ago when he took a number of Tylenol pills when his girlfriend broke up with him, and then he began counseling at that time. It's important to treat every situation like a new situation. In this case, you would go into threat assessment procedures, starting with the questions, going all the way through to the end with the risk assessment form to determine what risk Johnny is at this time, making sure that the threat assessment team has been notified and is kept informed so that decisions are made as a team and not as an individual. Unfortunately, if we get to this postvention part, it means that an event has taken place. The RUSD guidelines for postventions include resources from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, a toolkit for schools, the second edition, and National Association of School Psychologists, NASP, the Trevor Project Postvention Model, with additional resources. When an event has occurred, get the facts first. If the cause of death is unconfirmed, state that the cause of death is still being determined. Acknowledge rumors and remind that rumors can be extremely harmful. If the family does not want the cause of death to be disclosed, do not disclose the cause of death. Indicate that the family has requested that information about the death not be disclosed at this time. When the subject of suicide is raised, use this opportunity to provide information about suicide in a general way. As this is a very sensitive time, be sure to assemble the crisis response team. Notify the superintendent's office, assess the impact, offer condolences to the family, and arrange for a staff meeting. During this meeting, provide opportunity to vent feelings, provide handouts for identifying risk factors, discuss suicide contagion, discuss managing rumors, and discuss referral process to counselors and psychologists. Intervene with students and staff impacted by the loss. Support those who are talking about the loss, being careful not to do harm to other students who are not aware of or talking about the loss. Identify those significantly impacted and recognize risk factors and provide support. Assign duties to team members. Organize meetings with students as needed. Develop talking points for staff, students, parents, and media. Consider community resources. Helping students cope means to provide appropriate opportunities to express emotions and identify strategies to manage their emotions. Meet with students in small groups. Triage students who are at greater risk. Some of the resources we have in our community: FRC, Pacific Clinics, INKI, Foothill Family Services, and Children's Bureau. Strive to treat all students' deaths the same, and be careful not to glamorize the death by suicide. Suggestions are offered in the toolkit. Assign staff members to monitor social media to identify students at risk, partner with key students, and share prevention information. Suicide contagion. Although rare, 1 to 5% of all students, adolescents are more vulnerable. Messages to communicate. Suicide is complex and no one person or factor is to blame. It's not an option. Zero suicide movement, not a secret to keep, tell a trusted adult, and a key to the healing process to advocate for suicide prevention. Thank you for your work with students and families. Please note that the threat assessment team has been put in place to provide extra support for you as a professional. All these resources can be found on the RUSD website resources page under the Threat Assessment website.